I sat in the emergency room with purple finger marks on my wrist. In my pocket was a letter that read, "Irrevocable Trust, $10 million." My stepmother tore it open right before she lunged at me. If my grandfather had not secretly recorded the handover, no one would believe she attacked me because the money was not hers. He always said cash reveals character, but even he never expected her reaction to be this vicious. My name is Sabrina Lowell, and right now, the only thing keeping me upright is the plastic chair digging into my spine and the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor somewhere down the hall. The air in the emergency room smells of antiseptic and stale coffee, a sharp chemical scent that stings my nose, but it is preferable to the scent of expensive perfume and rage that I left behind at my father's house less than 2 hours ago. I sat alone in the corner of the waiting area, my left arm cradled against my chest. The nurse had just finished wrapping my wrist, her movements efficient and impersonal, but every time I shifted my weight, a fresh spike of pain shot up from my lower ribs where I had collided with the mahogany desk. I looked down at my wrist. The bandages were stark white, a blinding contrast to the dark wool of my coat, but I knew what lay beneath them. The purple bruises were already blooming, distinct oval shapes where human fingers had clamped down tight. They were not accidental marks. They were the imprint of intent. Just 120 minutes ago, I was standing in my father's study, holding a thick envelope. Then Valerie lunged. It was not a slap or a shove born of a heated argument. It was a tackle. She had moved with the desperate, feral speed of a cornered animal, shoving me backward until my spine and ribs slammed into the sharp edge of the heavy wooden desk. I remembered the sound of the air leaving my lungs, a wet, gasping wheeze, and the way her perfectly manicured nails had dug into my skin as she clawed the letter from my hand. A doctor walked over to me, a tired woman with graying hair tied back in a loose bun. She held a metal clipboard against her chest, her eyes scanning the notes the nurse had written. She looked at me, really looked at me, with that weary assessment that comes from seeing too many women sitting in plastic chairs with stories that do not match their injuries. "Ms. Lowell," she said, her voice soft but firm, "we have documented the contusions on your wrist and the bruising on your torso. Given the nature of the injuries, I have to ask, do you want to file a police report?" The question hung in the sterile air between us. I looked at the form on her clipboard. There was a small box waiting to be checked, right next to the line asking about the relationship to the aggressor. Domestic incident, family. I hesitated. The word family tasted like ash in my mouth. If I said yes, if I told her that my stepmother had assaulted me in my father's house while he was in the next room, the machinery of the law would start turning. Police would go to the house. Statements would be taken. My father would look at me with that disappointed, weary expression he always wore when I caused trouble for Valerie. He would say I was exaggerating. He would say I provoked her. "Ms. Lowell?" the doctor pressed gently. "I fell," I lied, the words feeling heavy and sharp on my tongue. "I tripped on a rug and hit the desk. It was an accident." The doctor did not believe me. I could see it in the tightening of her jaw. But she was bound by protocol. She nodded once, disappointed, and handed me a discharge paper. "If you change your mind, or if you do not feel safe going home, there are resources listed on the back of this sheet." I took the paper. "I am not going home," I said, and that was the first true thing I had said all night. When the doctor walked away, I reached into the deep pocket of my coat with my good hand. My fingers brushed against the thick, textured paper that had caused all of this. I pulled it out. It was crumpled now. The pristine linen stock creased and slightly torn at the corner where Valerie had ripped it open. I smoothed it out on my lap, staring at the bold black serif font that had turned a quiet evening into a war zone. Irrevocable Trust, $10 million. Beneficiary, Sabrina Lowell. Below the staggering sum was the signature of my grandfather, Arthur Lowell, and his attorney, $10 million. It was a number so large it felt abstract, like something from a movie, not something that belonged to me. But the pain in my ribs was real, the throbbing in my wrist was real, and the look on Valerie's face when she saw that number, that was the most real thing of all. My mind drifted back to the law office in downtown Denver. Just 48 hours ago, the room had smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco. Grandpa Arthur had sat across from me, looking older than I remembered, his skin like parchment, but his blue eyes were as sharp as cut glass. He had slid this very envelope across the polished oak table, his hand resting on it for a moment before releasing it. "Sabrina," he had said, his voice gravelly, "this is not a gift. This is a shield." I had tried to ask him what he meant, but he cut me off. "You are not to tell your father, and you are certainly not to tell Valerie, not until the papers are fully filed and the transfer is irreversible." He had leaned forward then, his gaze intense. "Money does strange things to people. Granddaughter, even people you think you know. If they know beforehand, they will not see you as kin anymore. They will see a walking safe. They will see a lottery ticket they think they deserve to cash." I had thought he was being dramatic. Grandpa was old, and he had always been suspicious of Valerie. Ever since she married my father when I was 10, I knew she was greedy. I knew she was vain. I knew she preferred her biological son, Dylan, over me in every conceivable way, but I did not think she was dangerous. I was wrong. Grandpa Arthur, with his century of wisdom, had seen the predator beneath the makeup long before I did. My phone vibrated violently against my thigh, snapping me back to the bright lights of the emergency room. It had been buzzing nonstop for the last hour. I stared at the screen. 17 missed calls from Dad, 12 missed calls from Valerie, 4 missed calls from Dylan. And then the texts. They were flooding in. A digital assault to match the physical one. I opened the message thread, my stomach turning over. "Dad, pick up the phone. Sabrina, we need to talk about this misunderstanding. Dad, Valerie is very upset. She says you pushed her. Why would you do that? Valerie, you ungrateful little brat. After everything I have done for you, you come into my house and wave fake papers around and attack me?" Then came a notification from an unknown number. It was a picture. I opened it and felt a cold chill run down my spine. It was a photo of me, taken perhaps an hour ago, stumbling out of my father's front door. In the photo, I looked deranged, hair messy, face flushed, clutching my bag, but the caption attached to it was what made my blood run cold. "Look at those marks on her face. She came here looking for a fight. Alcohol involved? Sad to see a family member spiral like this." She was spinning the narrative. She was already planting the seeds of doubt, suggesting I was drunk, unstable, or the aggressor. She had seen the $10 million, and in the split second before I snatched the letter back and ran, she had realized that she had no legal claim to it. So now, she was going to destroy my credibility. If I was incompetent, if I was unstable, maybe she could challenge the trust. Maybe she could petition for conservatorship. Panic began to rise in my chest, hot and suffocating. I was alone in a hospital. They were together in that big house, unifying their story, aligning their lies. My father, weak and easily manipulated, would believe whatever version Valerie fed him, because it was easier than facing the truth that he had married a monster. Dylan would follow the money, and I would be the outcast. Again. I was about to turn off my phone, to shut out the noise, when a different notification pinged. It was a secure message from an encrypted app I had installed only 2 days ago, on Grandpa's strict instructions. Sender, Marcus Henderson, Esca. Mr. Henderson was Grandpa's personal attorney, a man who smiled rarely and billed by the minute. I tapped the notification with a trembling finger. "Sabrina, I received an alert from the security system at the residence. The cameras in your father's study were active and recording to the cloud server as per Arthur's request. We have the footage." I stopped breathing. The study. My father had never installed cameras in the study. He said it made him feel watched. But Grandpa owned the property. The deed was still in his name, even though he let my father and Valerie live there rent-free. A second message popped up. "Secure link attached. I have already downloaded a copy to a secure off-site server. It is safe." And then, a third message. the one that made the tears finally spill over. Hot and angry. Arthur has been informed. He is demanding to see it. He is deeply shaken. He told me he suspected greed. Sabrina. But he never expected her reaction to be this violent. He is heartbroken that he was right. I stared at the phone, the white screen blurring through my tears. Grandpa knew. He had set a trap. Not for me, but for them. He had given me the letter knowing I would eventually go home, knowing I might slip up, or simply knowing that secrets in that house had a way of coming out. He had installed cameras not to spy on my father, but to protect me. He is demanding to see it. I imagined my grandfather sitting in his farmhouse in Wyoming, miles away from this chaos. I imagined him watching the screen, seeing the woman he had tolerated for 20 years lunge at his granddaughter, seeing her eyes bulge with avarice, seeing her strike me. A strange sensation washed over me. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It was the same feeling I used to get when I was managing complex logistics grids for my startup, the moment the chaos aligns into a solvable pattern. Valerie thought this was a he said, she said situation. She thought she could bully me into silence, gaslight my father, and use social pressure to make me look like the villain. She thought she was fighting a scared stepdaughter who used to hide in her room on Christmas while she opened presents with Dylan. She did not know about the camera. She did not know about the lawyer. And she certainly did not know that the $10 million was not just a pile of cash. It was a war chest. I stood up. My legs felt steady now. I walked over to the discharge counter and signed the paperwork with a flourish, ignoring the twinge of pain in my wrist. "Are you sure you have a safe place to go?" the nurse asked, taking the clipboard back. I looked at her, and for the first time that night, I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who just realized they are holding a royal flush while their opponent is betting the house on a pair of twos. "Yes," I said. "I am going to a hotel, a very expensive one, and then I am going to call my lawyer." I walked out of the emergency room, sliding doors into the cold night air. The wind bit at my cheeks, drying the few tears I had shed. I pulled my coat tighter around me, feeling the crinkle of the trust document in my pocket. It felt heavier now, not like a burden, but like a weapon. My phone buzzed again in my hand. Another text from Valerie. "Don't you dare ignore me. If you try to leave town with that fraudulent paper, I will call the sheriff. We can fix this if you just come home and apologize." I looked at the message and let out a short, sharp laugh that startled a passerby in the parking lot. Apologize. She wanted me to apologize for bleeding on her furniture. I did not block her number. I did not reply. I simply locked the screen and gripped the phone tighter. Let her text. Let her leave voicemails. Let her dig her hole deeper and deeper with every threat and every lie, because every word she sent was just more evidence for what was coming. I walked toward the taxi stand, my heels clicking rhythmically on the pavement. The pain in my body was still there, a dull throb that would likely turn into agony by morning, but the fear was gone, burned away. Grandpa Arthur had told me the money would reveal their true nature. He was right. It had peeled back the mask Valerie had worn for 2 decades in less than 60 seconds, but he had also said the trust was a shield. As I climbed into the back of the cab and gave the driver the address of the hotel downtown, I realized he was only half right. A shield is defensive. A shield is for protection. What I had in my pocket, and what I had on this phone, was not a shield. It was a sword. "Turn the radio up, please," I told the driver. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. The war had started tonight, in a study that smelled of cedar and betrayal, but Valerie had made a fatal miscalculation. She thought she had beaten the same little girl she used to ignore at the dinner table. She did not realize that girl had grown up, built a company, and learned how to survive in a world far colder than her living room. And she definitely did not realize that the old man she thought was senile and helpless on a farm in Wyoming was watching everything in high definition. I touched the pocket of my coat one last time. The letter was safe. The video was safe. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who needed to be afraid of the truth coming out. This time, I whispered to the empty cab, slipping unconsciously into a thought so profound it felt like a vow. The person being exposed is not me. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room buzzed with a frequency that drilled right into my skull, a sound that felt strangely similar to the silence of my childhood home in the mountains. That silence was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and cold. As I rubbed the soreness in my wrist, my mind drifted back to where the cold really started. It did not begin tonight with a letter and a bruise. It began 20 years ago, in a small town tucked into the shadow of the Colorado Rockies, where winter seemed to last for 6 months and the snow piled high enough to bury secrets. I was 10 years old when the temperature in our house changed forever. Before that, it was just my father and me. My mother had passed away when I was too young to remember her smell, leaving behind only a box of grainy photographs and a father who loved me but did not quite know what to do with a daughter. He was a good man, a mechanic who owned the most reliable garage in town. His hands were always stained with grease, and he smelled of motor oil and pine sawdust. Our life was quiet. It was a little lonely, perhaps, but it was ours. Then came Valerie. She swept into our lives like a warm front that promised spring, but brought a tornado instead. I remember the first time I met her. She was standing in the doorway of our kitchen, wearing a cashmere coat that looked too expensive for our town, smelling of vanilla and something sharp, like expensive hairspray. She had a smile that showed all her teeth, perfect and white, and she told me I was a precious little thing. I wanted to believe her. I was a child starving for a mother figure, and she looked like the mothers I saw in television commercials, beautiful, put together, and soft. She did not come alone. Trailing behind her was Dylan, her son from a previous marriage. He was exactly my age, 11 years old, with hair the color of corn silk and eyes that already knew how to ask for things without speaking. "We are going to be a real family now," my father had said, his eyes shining with a hope I had not seen in years. "Valerie is going to take care of us." He was half right. Valerie took care of everything. She rearranged the furniture, she changed the curtains, she repainted the walls, and with terrifying efficiency, she rearranged the hierarchy of our lives. It happened slowly, so slowly that if you were not paying close attention, you might miss the shift. It was in the way she served dinner. Dylan's plate was always heaped with the choicest cuts of meat, the freshest vegetables. Mine looked like an afterthought, a scoop of potatoes and the burnt end of the roast. "Dylan is a growing boy," she would say with a tinkling laugh if my father ever glanced at the plates. "He needs his strength for sports. Sabrina, darling, you do not want to get heavy, do you?" I was a scrawny, knobby-kneed girl who could barely hold up a backpack, but I nodded. I learned early on that nodding was safer than questioning. The house, which had once felt like mine, was carved up like a territory map. Valerie decided that Dylan needed the guest room because it had the south-facing window and the best light for his studies. I remained in my small, north-facing room where the draft from the window froze condensation on the glass every night. Within a month, Dylan's room was transformed. My father paid for new furniture, a computer desk, and posters of his favorite bands. My room stayed exactly the same, except the door seemed to stick more often, shutting me in. The first Christmas after they moved in was the moment the dynamic solidified into stone. The morning was blindingly white, fresh snow covering the yard. I woke up with that flutter of excitement that only a child feels on December 25th. I ran downstairs in my flannel pajamas, smelling cinnamon rolls and coffee. The tree was buried under a mountain of wrapping paper, gold and silver for Dylan, red and green for everyone else. "Go on," Valerie cooed, sitting on the arm of the sofa with a mug of cocoa in her hand. "Open them." Dylan tore into his pile like a wild animal. Box after box revealed treasures: a new gaming console, a designer jacket, a set of professional art markers, brand new sneakers. Every time he ripped paper, my father would smile and snap a picture. Then it was my turn. I had one small box and a flat envelope. I opened the box first. It was a scarf, not a new one, I recognized it. It was a scarf Valerie had worn the previous winter, the wool slightly pilling at the edges. "It is vintage," she said quickly, before I could speak. "Very stylish. It did not suit my complexion, but I thought it would look sweet on you." I swallowed the lump in my throat and opened the envelope. Inside was a stapled booklet of paper. I pulled it out. It was a coupon book. Not coupons for hugs or chores, but actual coupons she had cut out of the Sunday newspaper. 50 cents off laundry detergent. Buy one get one free on canned soup. $1 off a specific brand of toothpaste. I stared at it, confused. "I know you are starting to understand the value of $1, Valerie said, her voice dripping with faux pride. "I thought you could use those to help with the household shopping. It is time you learned responsibility." My father looked up from his camera, slightly frowning. "Valerie, honey, is that all for her?" "Oh, Arthur, do not be silly," she said, standing up and walking to the window. "Look outside." We all looked. There, in the driveway, gleaming against the snow, was a brand new, bright red dirt bike. It was magnificent. Chrome pipes, heavy tread tires, a machine built for freedom. My heart leaped. Maybe the coupons were a joke. Maybe the bike was for both of us. We were the same age, after all. "Go on, Dylan!" Valerie shrieked, clapping her hands. "It is yours. Merry Christmas, my golden boy." Dylan ran out into the snow in his socks, screaming with joy. My father followed him, laughing. I stood by the window, clutching the booklet of grocery coupons, watching them through the glass. They looked like a perfect family, a father, a mother, and a son. Valerie turned back to me, her smile tight and dismissing. "Sabrina, grab the camera. We need a picture of Dylan on the bike. You take the best photos since you are so observant." So I went out into the cold. I did not have a coat on, just my pajamas. I held the heavy camera, my fingers numb, and looked through the viewfinder. I framed them, Dylan sitting proudly on the bike, Valerie with her hand on his shoulder, my father beaming with pride at the happiness he had purchased. "Smile," I whispered, my voice lost in the wind. I snapped the photo. In that freeze frame, I did not exist. I was just the mechanism that recorded their joy. As we grew older, Valerie refined her terminology. She was too smart to be outwardly cruel in front of strangers. Instead, she used labels to separate us. When guests came over for dinner parties, people from the church or the town council, she would parade us out. "This is Dylan," she would say, beaming, resting her chin on his head, even when he grew taller than her. "He is the captain of the soccer team, my golden boy. He needs so much support. You know how geniuses are, high maintenance." Everyone would laugh warmly. Then she would gesture to me, standing awkwardly by the kitchen door. "And this is Sabrina. She is very independent." Independent. It was a code word. It sounded like a compliment, but in our house, it meant abandoned. It meant do not ask me for anything. "Sabrina does not need us to hover," she would tell my father when he asked why I was not joining them for a movie night. "She likes her quiet time. She is so self-sufficient." I became self-sufficient because I had no choice. When the faucet in the upstairs bathroom leaked, I knew asking Valerie to call a plumber would result in a lecture about how expensive life was. So I went to the library, checked out a book on home repair, and fixed it myself. When the snow piled up on the walkway, Dylan was inside playing video games. I went out and shoveled for 2 hours until my back ached, hoping that if I cleared a path, someone would notice I was valuable. I came inside, cheeks burning with cold, stamping snow off my boots. "Oh, good," Valerie said from the kitchen, not looking up from her magazine. "The walk is clear. Now Dylan will not slip when he goes to practice. That was very convenient of you, Sabrina." Convenient, not good, not kind. Convenient, like a toaster or a garage door opener. I looked at my father, who was sitting in his armchair, eyes closed, a beer in his hand. He looked exhausted. He worked 12 hours a day to pay for the things Valerie said we needed. The renovations, Dylan's tutors, the vacations. He had surrendered the management of the home entirely to her. "Dad," I said softly, "I fixed the leak in the bathroom too." He opened one eye and gave me a tired smile. "That is my girl. Low maintenance. I never have to worry about you. Sabrina, you are a survivor." He meant it as praise. He did not realize that telling a 12-year-old she is a survivor is an admission that she has been left to die. The isolation culminated on New Year's Eve when I was 14. Valerie had been planning the trip for months. A luxury ski resort in Aspen, a chalet with a hot tub, ski lessons for Dylan, fine dining. I had listened to them talk about it at dinner, staring at my peas, waiting for them to tell me what to pack. 2 days before the trip, Valerie came into my room. She did not sit down. She stood by the door, arms crossed. "Sabrina," she began, her voice pitching into that sweet, reasonable tone she used when she was about to cut me. "Your father and I have been talking. This trip to Aspen, it is going to be very crowded. The chalet only has 2 bedrooms." I looked at her. "I can sleep on the sofa." No. "We could not ask you to do that," she said, shaking her head as if the idea was preposterous. "Besides, Dylan is bringing his girlfriend this time. It is a special trip for them, and honestly, you do not even ski. You would be bored to tears sitting in the lodge all day." "I could learn," I whispered. "Ski lessons are incredibly expensive," she said, her eyes hardening just a fraction. "And we are on a budget. We decided it would be best if you stayed here. You can watch the house. We do not want pipes bursting while we are gone, do we? And you are so good at fixing things." She stepped closer and patted my cheek. Her hand was cold. "You are 14 now, basically an adult. I told your father you would probably prefer the space. You are so independent. After all, you will have the whole house to yourself, like a little vacation of your own." My father did not even say goodbye. He was already in the car, packing the skis onto the roof rack, checking the oil. He assumed Valerie had had a long, loving conversation with me about why I chose to stay home. He honked the horn, and they drove away, taillights fading into the gray afternoon. That night, the silence in the house was absolute. The town was quiet, everyone at parties or gathering in the town square. I sat on the rug in the living room, the only light coming from the television screen. I had made myself a sandwich for dinner, peanut butter and jelly. I ate it slowly, listening to the clock tick. On the screen, the crowds in New York City were cheering. Times Square was a sea of people, confetti, and noise. Everyone was hugging someone. Everyone was looking into someone else's eyes. I looked out the window. The street was dark. The snow was falling again, erasing the tire tracks my family had left. 10, 9, 8, the crowd on TV chanted. I wrapped my arms around my knees. I was not beaten. I had no bruises on my skin. I had food in the fridge and a roof over my head. If I called the police, they would laugh. My parents went on vacation and left me home. It sounds like a teenage dream. But the hollowness inside my chest felt like a physical wound. I was invisible. I was a ghost in my own life. 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year. The TV exploded with noise. Auld Lang Syne began to play. And then, the phone rang. The sound was so loud in the empty house that I jumped. I stared at the rotary phone on the side table. Who would be calling? I picked it up, my hand trembling. "Hello? Sabrina?" The voice was rough, deep, and miles away. It was Grandpa Arthur, my father's father. He lived on a ranch in Wyoming, a 4-hour drive north. He rarely visited because Valerie made him feel unwelcome, calling him a dirty old cowboy. "Grandpa?" I choked out. "Happy New Year, kid," he said. I could hear the wind howling in the background on his end. "I called your dad's cell, but it went to voicemail. I called the house thinking no one would be there, just to leave a message." He paused. The silence stretched on the line, heavy and thick. "Sabrina," he said, his voice changing, dropping an octave. "Where are they?" They went to Aspen, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Skiing. And you? I did not want to go. I lied, the lie Valerie had taught me. I wanted to stay home. I like the quiet. I am very independent. Grandpa. There was a long silence on the other end. Grandpa Arthur did not speak for 10 seconds. Then 20. I thought the line had gone dead. You are 14 years old, he said finally. The warmth was gone from his voice, replaced by a cold, hard anger that I knew was not directed at me. You are sitting in that house alone on New Year's Eve, while they are drinking champagne in a resort. I am okay, I whispered, tears finally spilling over hot down my cheeks. Really? Who are you watching the fireworks with? He asked. The TV, I admitted. Just me and the TV. He let out a breath that sounded like a hiss of steam. Listen to me. Sabrina, you go into the kitchen. You make yourself the biggest bowl of ice cream you can find. And you listen to me. You are not alone. Do you hear me? I am on this line. I am right here. He stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours. He did not talk about Valerie. He did not talk about my father. He told me stories about the ranch, about the horses, about how he once got snowed in for 3 weeks and had to eat nothing but canned beans. He made me laugh. But beneath his stories, I heard it. I heard the realization clicking into place in his mind. He was the only adult in my entire world who had looked at the picture Valerie painted, the picture of the independent daughter, and saw it for what it really was: neglect. I was being erased, slowly, methodically. I was being conditioned to ask for nothing, to expect nothing, and to disappear so that the resources of the family could be funneled entirely to Dylan and Valerie. When we finally hung up, the house was still quiet, but the cold felt different. It was no longer the cold of abandonment. It was the cold of clarity. I went to the window and looked at my reflection in the dark glass. I saw a girl with messy hair and tear-stained cheeks, but I also saw the girl Grandpa Arthur saw. I was not just independent, I was enduring. I did not know it then, but that phone call was the beginning of the secret alliance that would eventually lead to a $10 million trust fund and a letter that would tear the family apart. That night, Grandpa chose a side, and for the first time in my life, the side he chose was mine. After that lonely New Year's Eve, the dynamic between Wyoming and Colorado shifted. My grandfather, Arthur Lowell, stopped being just a distant voice on the telephone line and became a physical presence, an interventionist in a Ford pickup truck. He realized that leaving me alone in that house was akin to leaving a plant in a closet. It might survive, but it would grow pale and twisted. So, he decided to provide the sunlight himself. It began with the minor holidays, President's Day, Memorial Day, the random long weekends when the school district shut down, while Valerie and my father were busy planning excursions for Dylan, soccer camps, debate tournaments, or shopping trips to the city for essential social gear. I would hear the distinct rumble of a diesel engine in the driveway. Grandpa Arthur would drive 4 hours south from his ranch, his truck coated in a layer of dust that looked like a second paint job. He never came inside for long. He claimed Valerie's house smelled like a department store perfume counter, and it gave him a headache. Instead, he would stand on the porch, hat in hand, and tell my father simply, "I am taking the girl for a burger." Those drives were my salvation. We would go to a roadside diner halfway out of town, the kind of place with vinyl seats that stuck to your legs and coffee that tasted like burnt hickory. We did not talk much, certainly not about feelings. Grandpa was a rancher of the old school. He believed that emotions were private things, best handled like a fence post, dug deep and kept sturdy. But he spoke in gestures. One afternoon, when I was 15, we were sitting in a booth eating fries. I was shivering slightly, having outgrown my winter coat, though I had not dared to ask Valerie for a new one because she had just spent $300 on a new snowboard for Dylan. Grandpa watched me for a long moment, chewing his steak sandwich slowly. He did not say a word. He just finished his meal, paid the bill with a crisp $20 bill, and drove me to the local hardware and feed store. It was not a fashion boutique. It smelled of fertilizer and leather. He walked past the colorful displays and went straight to the back, picking out a pair of lined, deerskin work gloves and a heavy canvas barn coat. "Try this on," he commanded. It was beige and boxy, nothing like the pink puffer jackets the popular girls at school wore, but when I put it on, the fleece lining felt like a hug. It was warm. It was impenetrable. "It is too big," I said, looking at my sleeves. "Room to grow," he grunted. "And it is water-resistant. Fashion is for people who want to be looked at. Good gear is for people who are going places." When he dropped me off back home, wearing the coat and clutching the gloves, Valerie was waiting in the hallway. She looked at the utilitarian brown jacket with a curled lip. "Really, Arthur?" she sighed, leaning against the doorframe with a glass of white wine in her hand. "You spoil her with these odd gifts. She is going to look like a farmhand at school. How is she supposed to learn gratitude for what her parents provide if you keep undermining us?" I froze, waiting for the usual shame to wash over me, but Grandpa just looked at her, his blue eyes flat and unreadable. "If you provided a coat that fit," he said, his voice low and even, "I would not have to buy one." The girl was shivering. "Valerie, I do not care if she looks like a farmhand. I care that she does not freeze." He turned and walked back to his truck without waiting for a retort. Valerie stood there, her face flushing a blotchy red, but she did not say another word until his taillights disappeared. That was the moment I realized that Valerie was afraid of him. She could manipulate my father. She could bully me, but Arthur Lowell was a force of nature she could not control. As the years went by, I started to notice a pattern. Every time Valerie complained about money, which was often, Grandpa would go quiet. We would be sitting at the dinner table during one of his rare overnight visits, and Valerie would launch into a monologue about how expensive Dylan's private tutoring was, or how the market was squeezing their budget, hinting heavily that my father's garage wasn't bringing in enough. "We are thinking about the future," she said one evening, cutting into a steak that was undoubtedly paid for with my father's credit card. "You know, Arthur, you have all that land up in Wyoming, miles of it, just sitting there." Grandpa did not look up from his plate. "It is a working ranch. Valerie, it is not sitting there, it is grazing cattle." "But the market is shifting," she pressed, her eyes gleaming with that predatory avarice I had come to know so well. "I read that developers are looking for land up there for luxury eco-condos. If you sold even a parcel, just the South Ridge, you could liquidate so much capital. We could invest it, expand the garage, secure Dylan's college fund, and Sabrina's too. Of course." She added my name as an afterthought, a garnish on a plate she intended to eat herself. Grandpa set his knife and fork down. The clatter was gentle, but it silenced the room. He looked at my father, who was staring at his mashed potatoes, too weak to tell his wife to stop counting his father's money before he was dead. Then Grandpa looked at Valerie. "The land," he said, pronouncing each word with deliberate weight, "has been in the Lowell name for 80 years. It is not an investment portfolio. It is a legacy, and I do not sell legacy to buy condos for strangers." Then, his eyes flicked to me. It was a brief glance, lasting less than a second, but the message was clear. "This is not for them, and I know you are the only one who understands that." The summer I turned 16, I finally understood what he meant. I spent 2 weeks at the ranch that July. Usually, Dylan came too, but he spent the entire time tearing up the dirt roads on a brand new ATV my father had bought him, terrifying the horses and making a nuisance of himself. I, however, had no ATV. I had the quiet of the main house. One afternoon, while the whine of Dylan's engine echoed in the distance, Grandpa called me into his study. It was a room lined with books and old maps, smelling of cedar and dust. He walked over to a heavy steel safe in the corner and spun the dial. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, pulling out a thick, leather-bound ledger. "A book?" I guessed. "It is the ranch," he corrected. "The land is the body. This book is the brain." He sat me down and opened the ledger, It was rows and columns of numbers, handwritten in ink. Feed costs, veterinary bills, taxes, cattle auction prices, maintenance fees. To anyone else, it might have looked boring. To me, after years of living in a house governed by Valerie's chaotic, emotional whims, the numbers looked like poetry. They were logical. They made sense. If you spent more than you made, the numbers turned red. There was no favoritism in math. There was no, Dylan deserves more because he is a golden boy. The math just was. Dylan is out there burning gas, Grandpa said, gesturing toward the window. He thinks owning a ranch means riding fences and looking like a cowboy. But this is the work, Sabrina. Managing the assets, understanding the tax code, knowing the difference between a liquid asset and a liability. He spent the next 4 hours teaching me how to read a balance sheet. He explained how a trust worked, how compound interest could build an empire, or how debt could crumble one. I soaked it up like a dry sponge. I asked questions. I pointed out a discrepancy in the feed bill for March. Grandpa smiled. It was a rare, crinkly expression that lit up his whole face. "You have a head for it," he noted. "You do not get emotional about the expense. You look for the leak." That evening, before dinner, he drove me up to the high ridge, the very spot Valerie had suggested selling for condos. There was a small, weathered cabin there, built by his own father in the 1940s. It was simple. 1 room, a wood stove, a porch overlooking the valley. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a brass key. "This is the spare key," he said, pressing it into my palm. The metal was warm from his hand. "Your father does not have one. Valerie certainly does not. Just me, and now you." I looked at him, clutching the key. "Why me?" "Because everyone needs a place that is just theirs," he said, looking out over the sagebrush turning gold in the sunset. "A place where they are not a guest, where they do not have to say thank you to anyone for being there. Keep it secret. Sabrina, this is our spot." I put the key on a chain around my neck and tucked it under my shirt. It felt heavy, grounding. It was the first time in my life I felt like I actually owned a piece of the world, rather than just occupying space in someone else's. 2 years later, when I was 18, the divide between the two families, the one I lived with and the one I actually belonged to, became a canyon. I was accepted into the University of Denver. I had worked myself into the ground to get there, studying late into the night while Dylan played video games. I got a partial scholarship, but there was still tuition to pay. When the acceptance letter came, there was no celebration dinner. Instead, there was a tense family meeting. "It is just a lot of money," Valerie said, wringing her hands in a performance of fiscal responsibility. "University is so expensive these days, and Dylan is struggling a bit with his grades. We might need to pay for a private college to get him into a good program. If we send Sabrina to Denver, it might tap out the resources we need for him." My father looked at the floor. "Sabrina," he mumbled, "maybe you could take a year off? Work at the garage? Save up?" I felt the familiar coldness spreading in my chest. I was being asked, once again, to step back so Dylan could step forward. Grandpa Arthur was sitting in the armchair in the corner. He had driven down for my graduation. He had been silent for 20 minutes, listening to Valerie rationalize why my future was less important than Dylan's mediocrity. "She is going," Arthur said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through Valerie's whining like a knife. "But Arthur," Valerie began, her voice shrill, "it is an investment. You have to look at the return. Dylan is going to take over the business one day. Sabrina, well, she will probably just get married." Grandpa stood up. He looked at Valerie with a look of such profound disappointment that I almost felt sorry for her. "You talk about investment," he said, "but you do not know the first thing about value." He walked over to me and put a hand on my shoulder. "Pack your bags, kid. You are going to Denver." The next morning, as I was loading my beat-up Honda Civic to leave, Grandpa came out to the driveway. He looked older in the morning light, the lines around his eyes deeper. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick white envelope. He handed it to me through the open car window. I opened it. It was a stack of $100 bills. $5,000. "Grandpa," I gasped, "I cannot take this." "This is not charity," he said sternly, "and it is not a gift. Listen to me closely. Sabrina, this is capital. This is for books, for rent, for food, so you do not have to eat noodles every night. This is an investment in yourself." He leaned in, his hand resting on the doorframe. "Valerie thinks money is for buying things to show off. Your father thinks money is something you work for and then lose. I want you to learn that money is freedom. You take this, and you work hard, and you build your own life so you never have to ask them for permission to exist again." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "I will pay you back," I promised. "You do not pay me back," he said, shaking his head. "You pay it forward. You succeed. That is the repayment." As I drove away, watching him stand in the driveway in his rearview mirror, a solitary figure against the suburban lawn, I did not know what he was planning. I did not know that as he watched Valerie fuss over Dylan in the doorway, ignoring my departure, a resolve had hardened in his heart like concrete setting. He had seen enough. He had seen the neglect, the theft of opportunity, the callousness. That $5,000 was just the beginning. In his mind, the seed of the $10 million trust had just been planted. He realized that day that leaving me an inheritance in a standard will would never be enough, because Valerie would find a way to claw it back. He needed something stronger. He needed an ironclad lock. He needed a weapon that I could use when he was no longer there to stand in the driveway and defend me. I drove toward the city, toward the skyline of Denver, feeling the weight of the cash in the passenger seat. I was 18, scared, and lonely, but I had $5,000 and a key to a cabin on a chain around my neck. I thought that was the most he would ever give me. I had no idea he was already designing a future where I would own it all. Denver was a shock to the system. It was not the altitude that made me breathless. It was the speed. After 18 years of the suffocating silence of the mountains and the slow, heavy judgment of Valerie's household, the city felt like a machine that never turned off. I rented a room that was barely larger than a walk-in closet in a basement apartment near the University District. It smelled of damp concrete and cheap laundry detergent, but for the first time in my life, the air inside belonged entirely to me. I had the $5,000 Grandpa Arthur had given me, but I treated it like a museum artifact. I was terrified to touch it. It was my emergency fund, my "do not go back to Valerie" fund. So, to pay for tuition and rent, I took a job working the graveyard shift at a regional distribution center for a major shipping company. From 10 at night until 6 in the morning, I lived in a world of corrugated cardboard, scanning guns, and the relentless beeping of forklifts. Most of the other workers were just trying to get through the night, moving boxes from conveyor A to truck B with glazed eyes. But I could not turn my brain off. I looked at the warehouse floor and I did not just see boxes. I saw a grid. I saw a flowchart that was bleeding efficiency. The system was a mess. Packages were routed to the wrong bays because of zip code errors that a simple script could fix. Trucks sat idling for 40 minutes waiting for paperwork that should have been digital. Drivers drove empty trailers back to hubs because no one tracked the return logistics. It was chaos, and chaos costs money. I started bringing a notebook to work during my breaks. Sitting on a stack of pallets eating a cold sandwich, I would sketch out the logic of the floor. It was just like Grandpa's ranch ledger, only instead of feed costs and cattle weight, it was fuel surcharges and cubic feet of cargo space. I did not have a fancy computer, just a second-hand laptop I had bought from a pawn shop. I started building spreadsheets, massive, complex Excel files that linked together using macros I learned from YouTube tutorials at 3 in the morning. I started tracking the error rates of specific loading bays. I modeled the traffic flow of the trucks. One night, the floor manager, a gruff man named Miller who usually only spoke to bark orders, found me staring at a screen full of data instead of sweeping the dock. "What is that?" he asked, squinting at the columns of numbers. "It is a schedule optimization," I said, expecting to be fired. "If you load the trucks for the southern route in Bay 4 instead of Bay 1, you save 12 minutes of turnaround time per driver because they do not have to cross the main traffic lane." He looked at me, then at the screen, then at the bay doors. 12 minutes? Multiplied by 15 trucks a night, I added. That is 3 hours of labor costs saved, per shift. He implemented the change the next night. It worked. He never gave me a raise, and he certainly never told corporate that a 19-year-old college student had fixed his routing problem. But he started letting me sit in the dispatch office to mess with the computer whenever the floor was quiet. I did not mind the lack of credit. I was used to being invisible. In fact, I preferred it. Invisibility gave me the freedom to experiment without fear of failure. I realized quickly that Excel was too slow. The data was too big. So, I taught myself to code. I checked out books on Python and SQL from the university library and spent my weekends writing scripts that could scrape data from the shipping manifests automatically. I built a ghost system that ran parallel to the company's official, archaic software. While the managers were shouting into radios, my code was quietly predicting which trucks would be late before they even left the depot. My sophomore year passed in a blur of caffeine and code. Then came New Year's Eve. History has a funny way of rhyming. Just like that night when I was 14, the world was celebrating. I could hear the distant cheers from the downtown bars and the pops of firecrackers. My roommates were at a party. The students on campus were drunk and happy. I was at the warehouse. I had volunteered for the shift because it paid double time, and I needed the money for next semester's textbooks. I was standing on the loading dock, wearing a heavy safety vest over my hoodie, watching a truck back into place. The air was freezing, biting at my exposed face. Through the gap between the warehouses, I could see a sliver of the night sky. Suddenly, a firework exploded, a burst of red and gold against the black. It was just like the television screen in the dark living room of my childhood. But this time, I wasn't sitting on a rug waiting for a phone call. I was standing on my own 2 feet, earning my own way. I pulled out my phone and snapped a blurry picture of the fading sparks. I sent it to Grandpa Arthur. "Happy New Year," I typed. "The view is not great yet, but I am working so I can buy a better one." He replied 2 minutes later, "The view you earn is always better than the view you are given. Keep climbing, kid." That text message sparked something in me. I did not just want to fix the warehouse. I wanted to fix the whole broken map. I began developing a standalone piece of software. It was an algorithm designed to optimize less-than-truckload shipping, basically, how to combine partial loads from different companies into one truck to stop them from shipping air. It was unsexy, boring, back-end logistics work, and it was worth a fortune. A small startup in Denver, a team of 6 people working out of a converted garage in the Rhino district, saw a post I made on a developer forum about the code. They reached out. They did not care that I was a 20-year-old female student. They cared that my math worked. They offered me a job. "We cannot pay you much salary," the founder, a frantic guy named Ben, told me over coffee. "But we can give you equity, 1.5%. I countered. 3%, and I want the title of lead architect." Ben laughed, but he agreed. I dropped out of university the next day. I did not tell my father. I certainly did not tell Valerie. I just stopped paying tuition and started working 90 hours a week. The next 3 years were a hallucination of exhaustion. I lived on energy drinks and vending machine crackers. I slept under my desk more nights than I slept in my bed. But I was not just surviving. I was building. We pitched the software to mid-sized carriers. We got rejected. We tweaked the code. We pitched again. Then, the supply chain crisis hit. The global logistics network seized up. Ports were clogged. Trucks were scarce. Fuel prices skyrocketed. Retailers were panicking because their shelves were empty. Suddenly, efficiency was not just a bonus. It was the only way to stay alive. Our phone started ringing. My algorithm, the one that could squeeze 20% more efficiency out of a route, became the hottest commodity in the sector. We signed a regional grocery chain. then a national furniture retailer, then a massive auto parts distributor. I watched the company valuation grow on paper, but I kept my head down. I was still the ghost in the machine. When we had board meetings, I sat in the back, typing. When we closed deals, I went back to the server room to ensure the load balancers did not crash. I carried the habit of my childhood into my adulthood. Be useful, be quiet, and make sure everything works so you do not get yelled at. When I turned 27, a conglomerate based in Chicago made an offer to acquire us. They wanted the technology, and they wanted it exclusive. The negotiation took 3 weeks. I remember the day the deal closed. I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room, wearing a blazer I had bought at a thrift store because I hated spending money on clothes. I signed my name on a stack of documents 3 inches thick. My share of the buyout, after taxes and fees, came to a number that made my breath hitch. It was in the mid-7 figures. I stared at the wire transfer confirmation on my phone screen. I refreshed the banking app. Sure, it was a glitch. It was not. I was 27 years old, and I had enough money to never work another day in my life if I lived simply. But I did not want to live simply. I wanted to live securely. I did not go out and buy a sports car. I did not buy designer bags or post a picture of champagne on Instagram. I did the most logical thing I could think of. I called a real estate agent who specialized in discreet, high-end properties. I want a penthouse, I told her. Top floor, keyed elevator access, 24-hour security, and I want a view of the mountains. I bought a place in downtown Denver. It was a fortress of glass and steel. From my balcony, I could see the entire city spread out like a circuit board, and beyond it, the white peaks of the Rockies. It was quiet up there. The wind whipped around the glass railing, but inside, it was silent. I stood in the middle of the empty living room, the hardwood floors gleaming under the recessed lighting. I had done it. I had built the better view I promised Grandpa. I pulled out my phone to call him, but I hesitated. I wanted to tell him, but I also knew the rules of the game. Silence was power. If I told him, he might accidentally let it slip to my father. And if my father knew, Valerie would know. So I just sent him a picture of the view. No caption, just the mountains. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. He knew. A few days later, I received a text from Valerie. It had been months since we spoke. Your father says you are working for some computer company now. Good for you. At least you are self-sufficient. We are looking at a new car for Dylan. His credit is a little spotty because of that business idea that did not work out. So your father is going to co-sign the loan. It is a Mercedes. He needs to look professional for interviews. I told your father not to send you any birthday money this year since you have a job. You understand? I read the text while sitting on my Italian leather sofa, sipping a coffee that cost more than the hourly wage I used to make at the warehouse. He needs to look professional. Dylan was 27, unemployed, and needing his father to sign for a car he could not afford. I was 27, a multimillionaire, and self-sufficient. I understand, I whispered to the empty room. I typed back, that is fine. Tell Dylan congratulations on the car. I put the phone down. The unfairness used to burn like acid, eating away at my stomach. But now it felt different. It felt distant, like looking at a car crash through a telescope. They were down there, trapped in their cycle of image and debt and enablement. I was up here. I had not just escaped the house. I had escaped the gravity of their dysfunction. But the victory was quiet. It was a solitary feast. I had the money, I had the view, and I had the silence. What I did not have was a family to share it with, except for one old man on a ranch 400 miles away. I went to the window and pressed my hand against the cold glass. I was ready for whatever came next, or so I thought. I did not know that the real test was not making the money, but what would happen when the people who discarded me found out I was worth more than they could ever imagine. The 7-figure sum in my bank account was my secret armor, but the $10 million trust that was about to enter my life? That was the nuclear bomb, and I was walking straight toward the detonation site. The leaves in Denver were just beginning to turn that brittle, burning gold color when I received the call that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I was in my penthouse, standing at the kitchen island with a cup of black coffee, reviewing a logistics map for a client in Seattle. My phone buzzed against the marble counter. It was Marcus Henderson. I stared at the name for a moment. Marcus was my grandfather's attorney, a man as dry and unyielding as the Wyoming sagebrush. He had been handling the Lowell family affairs since before I was born, and he never called just to chat. If Marcus was calling, something was legal, and something was urgent. "Sabrina," his voice crackled over the line, bypassing pleasantries entirely. "Arthur wants to see you, tomorrow." "Is he sick?" My heart hammered against my ribs. Grandpa Arthur was 82. Every time the phone rang late at night or early in the morning, I braced myself for the news that the only person who truly loved me was gone. "He is in good health," Marcus said, though his tone remained grave. "But he has instructed me to summon you to the office in Laramie. He says it concerns the future of the ranch. And your future, he was quite specific that you need to come alone." I drove north the next morning. The 4-hour drive from Colorado to Wyoming was a journey I knew by heart, a transition from the glass and steel verticality of my new life back into the flat, horizontal expanse of my past. As the city faded in the rearview mirror and the wide, open plains stretched out before me, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. I was successful now. I was a millionaire in my own right, but crossing the state line always made me feel like that small, overlooked girl again. Marcus Henderson's office was located in a brick building that had probably stood since the railway expansion. Inside, it smelled of lemon polish and old law books. Grandpa Arthur was already there, sitting in a high-backed leather chair. He looked older. That was the first thing that hit me. The skin around his neck was looser, and his hands, resting on the head of his cane, trembled slightly with a tremor he could no longer hide. But when he looked up and saw me, his blue eyes were as sharp and terrifyingly lucid as ever. There was no fog in Arthur Lowell. "Sit down, Sabrina," he said. On the desk between us sat a stack of documents thick enough to be a novel. They were bound in heavy blue paper and stamped with red ink. Marcus Henderson cleared his throat and sat down opposite us. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and placed a hand on the documents. "Sabrina," Marcus began, "your grandfather has asked me to draft a new estate structure. This goes beyond a simple will. We are executing an instrument today that will alter the disposition of the Lowell assets significantly." I looked at Grandpa. "Is everything okay with the ranch?" "The ranch is fine," Grandpa said, his voice raspy. "The ranch is just dirt and grass. It is the people I am worried about." He nodded at Marcus. "Read it to her." Marcus flipped the cover page open. "This is an irrevocable trust instrument. It effectively removes a significant portion of Arthur's liquid assets and places them into a protected entity. The trust is funded by the proceeds of the land sale from the southern parcel, the sale Arthur completed quietly 6 months ago, and the accumulated dividends from his diversified portfolio over the last 40 years. He paused, looking me dead in the eye. "The principal sum of the trust is $10 million. The room went silent. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. $10 million. I blinked. I had money now. I had made millions from the sale of my startup. But that was new money. That was tech money. This was different. This was the lifeblood of the family. This was the money Valerie had been salivating over for 20 years. This was the money my father assumed would one day bail him out of his mediocre business decisions. "Beneficiary," Marcus continued, his voice devoid of emotion, "Sabrina Lowell." "Sole beneficiary?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Sole beneficiary," Marcus confirmed. "But what about Dad?" I looked at Grandpa. "What about Dylan? If you give this to me, Valerie will burn the world down." "Let her try," Grandpa said, his jaw set in a hard line. "I am not finished. Listen to the terms." Marcus turned the page. "The trust is structured to provide you with the interest income annually. You can use that for whatever you wish. However, the principal, the $10 million itself, is locked. You cannot touch it, and no one can sue you for it. It is protected from creditors. And more importantly, it is protected from marriage dissolution. He looked up, and there is a special clause Arthur insisted on inserting. Paragraph 14, Section B. Marcus slid the paper toward me. I read the text. The legal jargon was dense, but the meaning was chillingly clear. The trustee shall have the authority to release portions of the principal immediately and without limitation if the beneficiary requires funds for legal defense, security, or relocation arising from acts of harassment, physical violence, or extortion committed by any immediate family member, including but not limited to parents, step-parents, or siblings. I looked up, feeling the blood drain from my face. Grandpa, this says I can only access the main money if they hurt me. It says, Grandpa corrected softly, that if they come for you, you will have the resources to bury them. It is a poison pill. Sabrina, if they treat you well, the money stays locked, generating interest. If they try to harm you to get to it, the chest opens, and you can use every cent to fight back. But why? I asked, pushing the papers away slightly. I have my own money now. I do not need this. Divide it. Give half to Dylan. Give some to Dad. If you leave them out completely, they will hate me. They already hate you, Grandpa said. The bluntness of his words felt like a slap, but I knew it was the truth. They just tolerate you because they think you are irrelevant. They think when I die, the ranch goes to your father, and Valerie will finally be the queen of the castle. She's been waiting for me to die for 15 years. Sabrina. He leaned forward, gripping his cane. I am also changing the deed to the ranch. Upon my death, the title transfers to the trust. You will be the trustee. You will decide who lives there. You will decide if the cows are sold. You will decide if Valerie gets to keep her garden. She will never forgive this, I said. She will destroy the family. The family was destroyed the day she walked in and decided one child was gold and the other was garbage. Grandpa said, I just kept the peace because you were too young to fight, but you are a grown woman now. You built a company. You understand leverage. He reached out and took my hand. His skin was paper thin, but his grip was iron. I have watched them. Sabrina, I have watched how your father lets her speak to you. I have watched how Dylan ignores you unless he needs money. I am terrified that when I'm gone, they will try to bleed you dry. They will use guilt. They will use pressure. And if that does not work... He trailed off, looking at the clause about physical violence. I want to believe they would never hurt you physically, but greed makes monsters out of men. This trust is not a reward. It is legal armor. It is an insurance policy against their worst nature. So what do? I asked, looking at the $10 million figure again. You sign, Grandpa said, and then you do the hardest thing of all. You say nothing. Nothing? Not a word, he commanded. You do not tell your father. You do not tell Dylan. And you certainly do not tell Valerie. I want to run a test. He sat back, his eyes narrowing. I want to see how they treat you for the next few months. I want to see if they can be decent to you when they think you are just Sabrina the independent girl, not Sabrina the heir. If they can treat you with respect without knowing about the money, then maybe, down the line, you can choose to help them. But if they only show you love because they smell cash, then they deserve to find out they lost everything. I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking. I felt like I was signing a declaration of war. Not a trust fund. I thought about the coupons Valerie gave me for Christmas. I thought about the way she looked at me when I came home with bruises from the playground. Annoyed, never concerned. I signed. Marcus Henderson notarized the signature with a heavy thump of his stamp. He took the documents and placed them in a thick, cream-colored envelope. He sealed it with red wax, an old-fashioned touch that felt ominous. Irrevocable trust, $10 million. Beneficiary, Sabrina Lowell. Keep this safe, Grandpa said as I took the envelope. This is the only physical copy I want you to have. Marcus has the originals in the vault, but that piece of paper, that is your proof of power. I walked out of the office with the envelope tucked into my bag. It felt heavy, like I was carrying a loaded gun. On the drive back south, I made a detour. I turned off the highway onto the gravel road that led to the back of the ranch property. I drove up the winding trail to the ridge, to the small wooden cabin where Grandpa and I used to sit. I let myself in with the key I still wore around my neck. The cabin was cold and smelled of pine needles. I went to the small floor safe in the corner, hidden under a rug, the one Grandpa had shown me years ago. I took the thick envelope out of my bag. I hesitated. Grandpa had told me to keep it safe, but something in my gut, an instinct honed by years of surviving Valerie's snooping, told me not to keep all my eggs in one basket. I had asked Marcus for a second, certified copy before I left, claiming I wanted one for my own safe deposit box in Denver. I placed the original, wax-sealed envelope in the cabin safe and spun the dial. Left to 4, right to 10, left to 20. The lock clicked shut. I took the second copy, the one in the slightly thinner envelope, the one that still bore the terrifying header, and put it in my laptop bag. I would take that one back to Denver. I would hide it in my penthouse. As I drove away from the ranch, I looked in the rearview mirror. Grandpa was standing on the porch of the main house, watching my car kick up dust. The wind was whipping his scarf around his neck. He looked small against the vast Wyoming sky. He stood there like a sentinel, guarding the land he loved. He thought he had prepared for everything. He thought the legal papers were enough. He thought the secrecy would protect me. He was a brilliant man, Arthur Lowell. But as he watched me drive away, he made one fatal error. He underestimated just how volatile Valerie's rage would be. He thought the revelation of the money would bring lawsuits, shouting matches, perhaps a family estrangement. He never imagined that the paper I was carrying in my bag would lead to blood on his study floor. He never imagined that by giving me a shield, he had inadvertently invited the enemy to strike the first blow. 3 weeks after signing the papers in Wyoming, I found myself driving back to the town I had spent my entire adult life trying to escape. It was my father's 60th birthday, in Valerie's world. A 60th birthday was not a celebration of life. It was a stage production designed to showcase her status as the devoted wife and matriarch. The house was draped in gold balloons and overpriced streamers, and the driveway was packed with cars belonging to people my father barely knew, business associates, members of Valerie's garden club, and anyone she felt needed to witness her hospitality. I parked my rental car down the street because the driveway was full. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked nothing like the scared teenager who used to live here. I was wearing a tailored blazer and heels, the uniform of the CEO I had become, but inside, my stomach was twisting into knots. I reached over to the passenger seat and grabbed my leather laptop bag. It was heavy. Inside, tucked into the back pocket behind my MacBook, was the duplicate copy of the irrevocable trust. I had debated leaving it in the hotel safe in Denver, but I had a Zoom meeting with a potential investor scheduled for the next morning, and I needed the file reference numbers that were stapled to the back of the trust document. It was a logistical necessity, but carrying it into this house felt like walking into a bank with a stick of dynamite in my purse. When I walked through the front door, the noise hit me first. Laughter, clinking glasses, and the drone of polite conversation. Valerie was in the center of the living room, holding court. She wore a dress that was a little too tight and a little too sparkly, her hand resting possessively on my father's arm. Dad looked tired. He smiled when he saw me, but it was that same weary, apologetic smile he had worn for 20 years. "Sabrina!" Valerie's voice cut through the room, shrill and performative. "You made it. We were worried the big city life had made you forget where you came from." "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, ignoring her and hugging him. He smelled of aftershave and cake frosting. "Glad you are here, Bean," he whispered. "Look at you," Valerie continued, her eyes raking over my suit. "Very professional. I suppose when you do not have a husband or children to worry about, you can focus entirely on your wardrobe." I tightened my grip on my bag. "It is good to see you too, Valerie." Dylan was standing by the punch bowl, wearing a suit that fit poorly. He waved a glass at me. "Hey, sis, Did you see the new wheels out front? Mercedes C-Class? Rides like a dream? I saw it, I said. Congratulations. Yeah, well, big things are happening, Dylan said, puffing out his chest. I am launching a chain of premium car washes. High-end detailing. Dad co-signed the business loan. It is going to be a gold mine. I looked at my father. He looked away, focusing on a spot on the carpet. He had co-signed another loan, another financial anchor around his neck to keep Dylan afloat while I had built a multi-million-dollar company without asking them for a cent. Grandpa Arthur was sitting in his usual armchair in the corner, a silent observer of the circus. He held a glass of water, refusing the champagne Valerie's caterers were passing around. When our eyes met, he gave a nearly imperceptible nod. He knew what I had in my bag. He knew the secret we were keeping. Dinner was an ordeal. Valerie spent 40 minutes toasting my father, which was really just a speech about how hard she worked to keep the family together. She kept steering the conversation toward the future, toward legacy and assets. You know, Arthur, she said loudly, addressing Grandpa across the table, it is so good to see you looking well, but we really do need to sit down and discuss the estate planning again. God forbid something happens. We do not want the state taking 40% because the paperwork was not in order. Dylan has big plans, and we need to make sure the capital is accessible. Grandpa slowly cut a piece of roast beef. The paperwork is in order. Valerie, you do not need to worry about the state. Well, I worry about fairness, she said, her eyes darting to me. We all know you have your favorites, but when you are gone, family needs to take care of family. I just hope you have not done anything rash that would leave your son struggling. It was a direct threat, thinly veiled as concern. She was implying that if he left money to me, he was betraying his son. Grandpa did not take the bait. He just chewed his food, his eyes hard. By 8 o'clock, I had a migraine. I needed to escape. I have to send a few emails for work, I told my father. Do you mind if I use the study? Go ahead, Dad said, looking relieved to have a moment of peace from Valerie's hovering. It is unlocked. I walked into the study, the same room where Valerie had dragged me by the ear when I was 12, the same room where I used to hide during their arguments. It had not changed much. The heavy mahogany desk was still there, cluttered with bills and car magazines. I set my bag down on the desk and unzipped it to pull out my laptop. I needed to check the time for my morning meeting. As I pulled the computer out, the thick envelope of the trust document shifted. It did not fall out, but the top corner snagged on the zipper. The heavy cream paper with the logo of Henderson & Associates law firm was visible. I sat down and started typing a quick email to my assistant. The door was closed. I felt safe. Then the door handle turned. I looked up, expecting my father. It was Valerie. She was holding a plate with a slice of cake on it, her face arranged in a mask of forced sweetness. I brought you some cake, she said, walking in, since you are too busy working to join the family. Thanks, I said, reaching for the plate. I will be out in a minute. She set the cake down on the desk. Her eyes drifted to my open bag. It happened in slow motion. I saw her gaze catch the logo on the envelope. Henderson was a well-known name in the state for high-net-worth estate planning. She knew exactly who he was. And then she saw the word printed in bold, black letters on the document peeking out. Trust. What is that? She asked. Her voice dropped the sweetness instantly. Work papers, I said, reaching to zip the bag. I was not fast enough. Valerie's hand shot out, grabbing the edge of the envelope. That is Grandpa's lawyer, she snapped. Why do you have papers from Henderson? Valerie, let go, I said, standing up. She yanked the envelope free from the bag. She was strong, fueled by a lifetime of suspicion. She stepped back, ripping the flap open before I could come around the desk. Do not read that, I warned, my voice shaking. That is confidential legal property. I will read whatever is in this house, she hissed. She pulled the document out. Her eyes scanned the header. Irrevocable trust. Beneficiary. Sabrina Lowell. And then she saw the number. I watched the blood drain from her face. She went pale, her skin turning the color of old dough. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She read it again, her eyes bulging. $10 million. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of Dylan laughing in the living room. Then, the color returned to her face, but it was not normal. It was a violent, blotchy red. The vein in her neck began to throb. She looked from the paper to me, and for the first time in my life, I saw pure, unadulterated hatred. Not dislike, not annoyance, hatred. "You thief," she whispered. "It is not theft," I said, keeping the desk between us. "Grandpa set it up." $10 million? She screamed. The sound tore through her throat, raw and animalistic. "You manipulated him. You poisoned him against us. $10 million while your father is drowning in debt? While Dylan is trying to build a future?" She threw the papers into the air. They scattered across the room like white feathers. "He is senile!" she shrieked, stepping forward. "You took advantage of a senile old man to steal our inheritance. That is my money. That is your father's money." "It is his money," I yelled back, finding my voice. "And he chose who to give it to because he knew you would spend it on cars and vanity." That was the match in the powder keg. Valerie screamed, a sound of pure rage, and lunged at me. I was 27 years old. I was taller than her now, but the ferocity of her attack caught me off guard. She came around the desk with terrifying speed. She slammed her hands into my chest, shoving me backward. My heels slipped on the rug. I fell back, my left side colliding hard with the sharp corner of the mahogany desk. A sickening crunch echoed in my ears as my ribs hit the wood. The air left my lungs in a gasp of agony. I crumbled to the floor, clutching my side. But she was not done. She was on me. She grabbed a handful of my hair, yanking my head back. "You think you are better than us?" she spat, her face inches from mine, her breath hot and smelling of champagne. "You are nothing. You are a leech. Give it back. You sign it over or I will kill you." She grabbed my wrist, the one I had raised to protect my face, and squeezed. Her nails dug into the soft flesh of my inner arm. I felt the skin break. "Valerie, stop!" I gasped, trying to push her away with my free hand. I did not strike her, even in that moment, with pain radiating through my ribs. The legal instinct Grandpa had drilled into me held firm. Do not hit back. Do not give her a mark to show the police. I shoved her shoulder, hard, just enough to create space. She stumbled back, tripping over her own high heels. The door to the study burst open. "Valerie?" My father stood in the doorway, with Grandpa Arthur and Dylan right behind him. The scene was chaotic. Papers scattered everywhere, me on the floor, clutching my ribs, gasping for air. Valerie panting, her hair wild, standing over me. For 1 second, the truth was obvious. Then Valerie threw herself onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands, and began to sob loudly. "She hit me," she wailed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She attacked me. I caught her stealing. She has forged papers. She tried to kill me." My father looked at me, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. "Sabrina?" I pulled myself up, using the desk for support. My side felt like it was on fire. I looked at my wrist. Deep, bleeding crescents from her fingernails were already turning purple. "She saw the trust," I wheezed, looking at Grandpa. "She saw the letter." Dylan stepped into the room, looking at the scattered papers. He picked one up. He read the number. His jaw dropped. $10 million? He muttered. He looked at me, and his eyes changed. The brotherly indifference was gone, replaced by the same cold greed I saw in his mother. "You stole $10 million from Grandpa?" "Dad," I said, ignoring Dylan, looking straight at my father. "I did not touch her. She attacked me. Look at my wrist." Valerie wailed louder. "She is lying. She is a pathological liar. She has always been jealous of us. Arthur, tell them. Tell them she made you sign it." Grandpa Arthur stepped into the room. He walked slowly. his cane thumping against the floor. He did not look at the papers. He looked at Valerie. "We need to call an ambulance," Grandpa said calmly. "Yes," Valerie cried. "For me, my heart. She almost gave me a heart attack." "For Sabrina," Grandpa said, his voice ice cold. He looked at me. "Go, get to the hospital, document everything." "Dad, you are taking her side?" my father asked, his voice trembling. "Valerie is your daughter-in-law. She says Sabrina attacked her." I grabbed my bag, shoving the laptop inside. I did not stop to pick up the trust papers. They were tainted now. I just wanted to get out. "I am leaving," I said, my voice steady despite the pain. "Do not come near me." I walked past Dylan, who made a move to block me, but stopped when he saw the look in my eyes. I walked past my father, who looked utterly lost. I walked out the front door, into the cold night air. As I stumbled toward my car, clutching my ribs, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus Henderson. "System alert. Motion detected in study. Cloud upload complete." I froze, my hand on the car door handle. The study. Grandpa had told me he installed security at the ranch, but I remembered something he said months ago. A passing comment about updating the security at my father's house because the neighborhood was getting rough. I thought he meant the perimeter. I looked back at the house. The windows of the study were glowing. Inside that room, Valerie was spinning her web of lies, telling my father how I had assaulted her, how I was a thief, how I was dangerous. She thought it was her word against mine. She thought she could use this to invalidate the trust, to prove I was mentally unstable, to strip me of everything. She did not know that in the corner of the bookshelf, behind the row of old encyclopedias, a tiny lens had just captured every second of her greed. It had captured the moment she read the number. It had captured the moment she lunged. It had captured the way she strangled the truth out of the room. I got into the car and started the engine. The pain in my side was excruciating, likely a cracked rib, but as I backed out of the driveway, leaving the birthday party that had turned into a crime scene, a strange calm settled over me. Grandpa never expected her reaction, I whispered to myself, repeating the words he had said to the lawyer. He had expected anger. He had expected a lawsuit, but he had not expected her to draw blood. I drove toward the hospital, the headlights cutting through the dark. I was injured. I was alone. My family had just imploded. But as I touched the pocket where my phone sat, the phone that was now linked to a server holding the undeniable truth, I knew one thing for sure. Valerie had just won the battle in that room, but she had just handed me the weapon that would win the war. "Trust is a shield," Grandpa had said. I looked at the bruises forming on my wrist under the streetlights. No, I thought. Tonight, it is a trap, and she just walked right into it. The morning sun was harsh and unforgiving as it cut through the blinds of Marcus Henderson's law office. It was a stark contrast to the gray, throbbing pain that radiated from my left side every time I took a breath. I sat in the same leather chair I had occupied weeks ago, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted from businesslike caution to the heavy, suffocating silence of a funeral parlor. Grandpa Arthur sat across from me. In just 24 hours, he seemed to have aged a decade. His skin, usually weathered and tough like old saddle leather, had taken on a translucent, ashy quality. His hands, resting on the polished mahogany table, were trembling. It was not the tremor of age. It was the tremor of a man holding back a tidal wave of rage. Marcus stood by a large monitor mounted on the wall. He looked tired, his tie loosened, as if he had been up all night. "Are you ready?" Marcus asked softly, his hand hovering over the mouse. I nodded, clutching my side where the doctor had taped my cracked ribs. "Play it." The screen flickered to life. The timestamp in the corner read 8:15 in the evening. The camera angle was high and wide, capturing the entire study in high definition. There I was, sitting at the desk, looking tired and small. Then, the door opened. We watched in silence as Valerie entered. We watched the false sweetness, the cake, the snooping, and then, we watched the moment her eyes locked onto the envelope. Marcus slowed the playback speed. "This," Grandpa whispered, his voice cracking. "This is what I needed to see." On the screen, Valerie's face was a mask of discovery. We watched her pull the document out. We saw her lips move as she read the words, "irrevocable trust," and then, the moment she saw the number $10 million, it was terrifying to watch in slow motion. The shock on her face did not melt into confusion or even disappointment. It dissolved instantly into a contorted, feral snarl. It was the face of an addict being denied a fix. It was the face of a woman who believed she was owed the world and was ready to burn it down to get her share. Then came the violence. I flinched as on-screen Valerie lunged, even knowing it was coming. Seeing the force with which she shoved me was shocking. I watched my own body fly backward, hitting the corner of the desk with a sickening speed. I watched her grab my hair. I watched her shake me like a rag doll. Grandpa Arthur slammed his hand down on the table. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Enough," he choked out. "Turn it off." Marcus clicked the mouse, and the screen went black, but the image of Valerie's twisted face seemed to burn in the air between us. Grandpa took a long, shaky breath. He took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. When he looked at me, his eyes were wet. "I knew she was greedy," he said, his voice low and rough. "I knew she was manipulative. I told you. Sabrina, I expected them to beg. I expected guilt trips. I expected her to forbid your father from speaking to you." He shook his head slowly. "But to put her hands on you, to strike a grown woman, her husband's daughter, because of a piece of paper? I never expected her reaction to be that." "She was scared," I said quietly. She realized in that second that she had no control, and violence is the last resort of people who have lost power. "It is also a crime," Marcus interjected, his tone shifting back to that of the ruthlessly efficient lawyer. "Arthur, under the provisions of the trust structure we drafted, and under general estate law, this footage changes everything. We are no longer talking about protecting assets from mismanagement. We are talking about protecting the beneficiary from a hostile party." Marcus walked over to the table and opened a file. "Paragraph 14, Section B," Marcus recited from memory. "The bad actor clause. You specifically included language regarding physical harm. By attacking Sabrina in a dispute over the assets, Valerie has effectively triggered the nuclear option of the estate plan." Grandpa put his glasses back on. The sadness in his eyes hardened into something cold and sharp, like chipped flint. "Write it down," Grandpa commanded. "We are rewriting the will. Today, right now." "I have the draft prepared based on our phone call at 3 a.m, Marcus said, sliding a fresh stack of papers across the desk. "I want her name gone," Grandpa said. He was not shouting. He was speaking with the terrifying calm of a judge passing a death sentence. "Valerie is to receive nothing, not a cent, not a piece of furniture, not even a picture frame from the ranch house. She is disinherited completely and permanently." "And my father?" I asked, a lump forming in my throat. "He didn't hit me, Grandpa. He just stood there." "He stood there," Grandpa repeated bitterly. "He stood there while his wife assaulted his child. And then he asked if she needed an ambulance. That is not neutrality, Sabrina. That is complicity." He turned to Marcus. "Robert's share? The portion I was leaving to my son. Lock it up." "We can place it in a spendthrift trust," Marcus suggested, scribbling notes. "Controlled distribution. He gets a monthly allowance for living expenses, enough to be comfortable, but not enough to fund Valerie's lifestyle or Dylan's failed businesses, and we appoint a trustee to oversee it." "I will hire a professional trustee," Marcus offered. "No," Grandpa said. He looked at me. "Sabrina will be the trustee." My eyes widened. "Grandpa, no. If I control Dad's money, they will say I manipulated you to enslave them. It will act as fuel for their hatred." "Let them hate," Grandpa snapped. "I am done trying to be loved by people who only love my wallet. You are the only one in this family with the financial literacy to ensure Robert does not starve in his old age. If I give the money to him directly, Valerie will drain it in a year. If I give it to you to dispense, she has to beg you for every dollar. That is the checkmate. There is one more thing, Grandpa said, tapping the table. The scholarship fund. I looked at him, confused. What scholarship? I am taking the liquid assets that were originally earmarked for household improvements, the money Valerie thought she would use to renovate your father's house, and I am diverting them. He leaned back, a grim smile touching his lips. I am establishing the Elena Lowell Memorial Scholarship. Elena. My mother, the woman whose memory Valerie had tried to erase from the house the moment she moved in, the woman whose photos were taken down and put in boxes in the attic. A scholarship for young women in the foster system who want to study business or engineering, Grandpa continued. And I want the press release to go out the day after the funeral. I want Valerie to read in the newspaper that the money she wanted for a new kitchen is sending girls to college in the name of the woman she replaced. It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. It was cruel, perhaps, but it was the kind of cruelty that felt like justice. Grandpa, I said, shifting in my chair to ease the ache in my ribs. I just want this to be over. I do not want a war. I can take the trust money and go back to Denver. I can disappear. If we do this, if we drop this hammer on them, they will come after me. They are already coming after you, Grandpa said, leaning forward. Sabrina, wake up. Look at your wrist. Look at your side. The war started the minute she saw that paper. You cannot leave the battlefield just because you did not want to fight. If you run now, she will spend the rest of her life spinning a narrative that you are a thief who abused me. She will sue you. She will harass you. He took a deep breath. We have to end it. We have to cut the head off the snake, and we have to do it while I am still alive to witness it. How? I asked. A family meeting, Marcus said. At the ranch, this weekend. I shook my head. I cannot go back in a room with her, not yet. You have to, Grandpa said firmly. We need them all in one room, Valerie, your father, Dylan, and I am inviting a few others, your Aunt Clara, your cousin Mike, witnesses, people who are neutral but influential in the family. We are going to tell them it is a mediation, Marcus explained. We will tell them that Arthur wants to settle the confusion regarding the trust and discuss the future of the estate to avoid litigation. They will think I am caving, Grandpa said. Valerie will think I am scared of her threats. She will come expecting a settlement. She will come expecting to bully me into canceling the trust. And then? I asked. And then we play the movie, Grandpa said. I froze. You want to show the video? To everyone? To everyone in that room, Grandpa confirmed. Valerie has spent 20 years painting you as the difficult one, the ungrateful one, the one who makes things up. She has already told people you attacked her last night. If we just change the will, she will lie about why. She will say I am senile. She will say you forced me. He pointed at the blank screen. But that video? That is the truth. It strips her naked. I want your father to see it when he is not in the heat of the moment. I want Dylan to see his mother for who she is. And I want the extended family to know exactly why she is being cut out. It will humiliate her, I whispered. It will destroy her reputation. She destroyed her reputation when she assaulted my granddaughter. Grandpa said, I am just turning on the lights. He turned to Marcus. Prepare 2 sets of documents. 2? Marcus asked. Yes. Set 1 is the old will, the one she thinks exists, the one where things are split somewhat evenly, with the ranch going to Robert. I want that on the table when they walk in. I want her to see it. I want her to think she has won. And the second set? The new one, Grandpa said. The one we just discussed. The one where she gets 0. We keep that under the table. We only bring it out after the video ends. It was a trap, a calculated, brutal trap, designed to let Valerie walk in with her head high, thinking she had successfully intimidated us, only to have the floor drop out from under her in front of an audience. Sabrina, Grandpa said, softening his tone, I know you are afraid. I know you hate conflict. You learned to be invisible to survive her, but you cannot be invisible anymore. You are the matriarch of this family now, whether you like it or not. You have the resources. You have the power. You have to stand up. I looked down at my hands. I thought about the little girl who ate peanut butter sandwiches alone on New Year's Eve. I thought about the teenager who fixed the plumbing while Dylan played video games. I thought about the woman who was thrown into a desk last night. If I walked away, Valerie won. If I stayed silent, she kept her mask. Okay, I said. We do it. Good, Grandpa said. He stood up, leaning heavily on his cane. Marcus, get the paperwork drafted. I want it watertight. No loopholes. If she hires the best lawyer in the state, I want them to look at this will and tell her to go home and cry because there is nothing they can do. It will be ironclad, Marcus promised. We walked out of the office together. The wind had picked up, blowing dust across the parking lot. I helped Grandpa into his truck. He looked exhausted, his energy spent by the meeting. But there was a set to his jaw that I recognized. It was the look he had when a storm was coming in over the mountains. Alert, prepared, and unyielding. Go to the ranch, he told me. Stay in the main house with me. Do not go back to the hotel. I have the foreman patrolling the gate. She cannot get to you there. I nodded. I climbed into my rental car and followed his truck out of town. We drove in a convoy toward the mountains, toward the family seat that was about to become a courtroom. Later that evening, I stood on the porch of the guest cabin, the one Grandpa had given me the key to so many years ago. The sun was setting, casting long, blood-red shadows across the valley. The air was cold and clean. I looked down at the main house, where the lights were glowing warm and yellow. In 3 days, that dining room would be full. My father would be there, Dylan would be there, and Valerie would be there, wearing her best dress, armed with her lies and her entitlement. She thought she was coming to negotiate. She thought she was coming to accept my surrender. I touched the bandage on my wrist. She did not know that the old man she called a dirty cowboy, and the stepdaughter she called ungrateful, had spent the day sharpening the guillotine. This time, I whispered into the wind, repeating the vow I made in the hospital. The person being exposed is not me. The wind howled back, a sound that felt like agreement. The trap was set. Now, we just had to wait for the predator to walk in. The wind howling down from the Bighorn Mountains sounded like a warning, rattling the frost-covered panes of the main ranch house. It was a bitter, gray Saturday afternoon in Wyoming, the kind of weather that usually kept folks huddled by their fireplaces. But today, the driveway of the Lowell Ranch was filling up with vehicles. I stood by the window in the dining room, adjusting the cuff of my blazer. My side throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, a physical reminder of the cracked rib protected by layers of tape beneath my silk blouse. Beside me, Grandpa Arthur leaned on his cane, watching the arrivals with the impassive gaze of a general surveying a battlefield before the first cannon fire. Here she comes, he murmured. A sleek black SUV crunched over the gravel, parking aggressively close to the porch. Valerie stepped out. She was dressed for a gala, not a family meeting at a working ranch. She wore a floor-length fur coat that probably cost more than the annual feed budget for the cattle, and her hair was coiffed into a helmet of blonde perfection. She looked like a woman arriving to collect a prize. My father got out of the driver's seat, looking pale and shrunken in his heavy coat. Dylan followed, scrolling on his phone, looking bored. Behind them, other cars pulled in. Aunt Clara, my father's older sister, who had always looked at Valerie with polite suspicion, Cousin Mike, a no-nonsense foreman from the neighboring county, and 2 other cousins, the witnesses. "Are you ready?" Grandpa asked, turning to me. "I am," I said. My voice was steady, though my pulse was hammering against my bruised wrist. "Let them in." We had arranged the dining room with surgical precision. Usually, for Thanksgiving or Christmas, we pushed 2 tables together. The adults sat at the heavy oak table, and the kids, a term Valerie still applied to me at 27, were relegated to a card table in the corner. Not today. Today, there was one long, continuous table. Grandpa sat at the head. I sat at his right hand, and directly across from me, the place setting marked with a stiff white card read, Valerie. We had removed all the flowers, all the centerpieces. There was nothing to block the line of sight. When they entered the room, stomping snow off their boots, the atmosphere was immediately confused. Valerie swept in, her eyes darting around, expecting a somber, defeated old man ready to sign checks. Instead, she found a boardroom. "Arthur?" she cooed, moving to kiss his cheek. He turned his head slightly, so her lips hit the air. She stiffened but recovered quickly. Turning her eyes to me, her gaze dropped to my wrist, which was wrapped in a subtle beige bandage. A flicker of triumph crossed her face. She thought I was hiding the injury because I was ashamed. "Sabrina," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern, "I see you decided to join us. I hope you are feeling more stable today." "I am feeling very clear, Valerie," I replied. "Please, take a seat." She frowned at the seating arrangement. "Oh, we are all sitting together? How egalitarian." She sat in the chair opposite me. My father took the seat next to her, refusing to meet my eyes. Dylan slumped into a chair further down, looking at the empty plate. "So," Dylan said, breaking the silence as the rest of the family settled in, "is this about the trust? Mom said we are finally sorting out the shares for the business capital." "We are here to eat first," Grandpa said, his voice cutting through the chatter. "We will discuss business after the meal." The dinner was a masterpiece of tension. The housekeeper served pot roast and roasted root vegetables, the smell of rosemary and garlic filling the room. But no one really ate. The only sound was the clinking of silverware on china. Valerie tried to dominate the conversation, launching into a monologue about the stress of the past few weeks, casting meaningful glances at me as she talked about unpredictable behavior and protecting the family legacy. "It has been so hard on Robert," she sighed, placing a hand on my father's arm. "Having to deal with so much discord. We just want peace. We just want what is fair." I said nothing. I cut my meat into precise, bite-sized pieces. I watched her. For years, I had sat at tables like this and shrunk into myself, trying to be invisible so she would not target me. Today, I sat with my spine straight, ignoring the pain in my ribs, and I stared right back at her. It unnerved her. She kept fidgeting with her napkin, reapplying her lipstick, checking her reflection in her spoon. When the plates were cleared, the air in the room shifted. It became heavy, charged with static. Grandpa Arthur cleared his throat. He picked up his water glass and tapped it with a spoon. Cling, cling, cling. The room went silent. Aunt Clara put down her coffee cup. Cousin Mike folded his arms. "Thank you all for coming," Grandpa began. His voice was not the raspy whisper of an old man. It was deep and resonant. "Valerie has been asking for a meeting to clarify the estate, to discuss the assets, to ensure, as she puts it, that the family is treated with fairness." Valerie nodded, a smug smile touching her lips. "Exactly. Arthur, we just want to make sure everything is transparent." "I agree," Grandpa said. "Transparency is essential." He nodded to Marcus Henderson, who had been sitting quietly at a small side table. Marcus stood up. He did not look like a family lawyer today. He looked like a prosecutor. He placed a laptop on the end of the dining table, facing the guests, and connected it to a small portable projector he had set up earlier, pointing at the blank cream wall behind me. "Before we discuss numbers," Grandpa said, "I want to show you something. I think it is important that everyone in this room understands exactly what is at stake." "What is this?" Valerie asked, her smile faltering slightly. "Home movies?" "In a way," Grandpa said. Marcus hit a key. The wall behind me flickered to life. The image was crisp and clear. It was the interior of my father's study. The timestamp in the corner read, October 24th, 8:14 p.m. A collective murmur went through the room. My father froze. He recognized the room. He recognized the night. On the screen, the digital version of me sat at the desk. Then, the door opened. Valerie walked in. I watched Valerie's face in real life. The color drained from her cheek so fast, it looked like a magic trick. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "Arthur," she warned, her voice trembling. "What is this?" "Watch," Grandpa commanded. The video played. The room was dead silent, save for the audio coming from the laptop speakers. The sound of Valerie's voice, sweet and manipulative at first, offering cake, then the discovery. Trust, beneficiary, Sabrina Lowell, $10 million. When the words $10 million echoed from the speakers, a gasp went around the table. Aunt Clara covered her mouth. Cousin Mike's eyes widened. But the real shock hit Dylan. He sat up straight, staring at the screen. He had heard his mother talk about unfairness and scraps, but he had never heard the number. $10 million? Dylan whispered. He looked at his mother. "You knew about $10 million? "Shut up," Valerie hissed, her eyes glued to the screen. Then the violence started. The entire room flinched when on-screen Valerie lunged. The sound of the impact, my body hitting the mahogany desk, was a sickening, dull thud that seemed to vibrate through the dining room. The image of Valerie grabbing my hair, her face twisted into a mask of demonic rage, was undeniable. "You thief! Give it back! I will kill you!" The recorded scream sliced through the air. My father put his head in his hands. He could not look. He was shrinking into his chair, trying to disappear. On the screen, the door burst open. The video ended with the image of me gasping for air on the floor and Valerie faking her tears. The screen went black. For 10 seconds, no one breathed. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a reality shattering. Then Valerie stood up. Her chair scraped violently against the floorboards. "That is edited," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the wall. "That is fake. She manipulated the footage. You all saw it. She attacked me first. It is a deep fake." "Sit down, Valerie," Grandpa said. He did not shout. He spoke with a terrifying quietness. "I will not sit down," she shrieked. She looked around the table, searching for an ally. "Robert, tell them. She is lying. You were there." My father slowly lifted his head. He looked at the screen, then at me, and finally at his wife. His face was gray. "I was not in the room when it started. Val," he whispered, "but I saw the video just now. You threw her into the desk." "She provoked me," Valerie yelled, pivoting instantly from denial to justification. "She stole $10 million from this family, from your son. I was protecting us." "No," Grandpa said. "You were protecting your access to my wallet." Grandpa stood up. He leaned on his cane, towering over the table despite his age. "I established that trust," he said, addressing the whole room, "because I feared that one day my granddaughter would be bullied out of her inheritance. I feared she would be pressured. I told her that the trust was a shield." He looked straight at Valerie. "But you, Valerie, you showed me that a shield is not enough. You showed me that you love money more than you love your own dignity, and certainly more than you love the people in this family. You struck a child of this house, in my home, or in my son's home. That is a line you do not cross." He nodded to Marcus. "Read the new will." Marcus picked up a document from the table. It was not the thick stack Valerie had eyed greedily when she walked in. It was a single, thin sheaf of papers. "This is the last will and testament of Arthur Lowell, dated yesterday," Marcus announced. His voice was dry and professional, which made the words sting even more. "Regarding Valerie Pierce Lowell," Marcus read, "she is hereby fully disinherited. She shall receive 0% of the estate, no cash, no property, no personal effects. Furthermore, she is barred from entering the ranch property effective immediately." Valerie made a choking sound. "You cannot do that. I am Robert's wife. Marital property laws." "The ranch is in a trust," Marcus cut her off smoothly. "It is not Robert's property. It never was." "Regarding Robert Lowell," Marcus continued, "his share of the estate is placed into a spendthrift trust. He will receive a monthly stipend for living expenses, subject to annual review." Marcus paused, looking over his glasses at Dylan, who was pale and sweating. "Regarding Dylan Pierce, He is removed from the will entirely. Any outstanding loans co-signed by Arthur Lowell or Robert Lowell using estate collateral are to be called in immediately." Dylan looked like he had been punched in the gut. "Wait, my business loan? The car?" "The collateral was the expectation of inheritance," Grandpa said coldly. "That expectation is gone." "And finally," Marcus said, turning the page, "the control of the Lowell Family Trust, including the ranch, the liquid assets, and the oversight of Robert Lowell's stipend, is granted to the sole trustee." He looked at me. "Sabrina Lowell?" The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was not confused. It was stunned. Valerie stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed. She looked at the table, at the fine china, at the guests. She realized that everyone in the room, Aunt Clara, Cousin Mike, even her own husband, was looking at her not with sympathy, but with judgment. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling with venom. "You planned this. You set me up." "I did not make you hit me, Valerie," I said. My voice was calm, steadier than I ever thought it could be. "I did not make you scream about money while I was on the floor. You did that all by yourself. All I did was turn on the lights." Aunt Clara cleared her throat. She reached for her wine glass, took a sip, and nodded once at me. It was a small gesture, but it was an earthquake. The extended family had chosen a side. Dylan looked at his mother, then at me. He did the math in his head. The car wash chain, the Mercedes, the lifestyle, it was all evaporating. "Mom," Dylan said, his voice cracking. Did you really hit her for the money?" "I did it for you," Valerie snapped at him. "Well," Dylan said, slumping back in his chair, looking at the ceiling, "you just cost us everything." Grandpa Arthur sat back down. He looked tired, but satisfied. "The meal is finished," he said. "Valerie, you will leave my property. Now, the sheriff is parked at the main gate to ensure you do not get lost on the way out." Valerie stood there for a long moment. She looked at my father, waiting for him to stand up, to defend her, to rage against his father. My father looked down at his hands. He picked up his fork and pushed a carrot across his plate. He did not move. Valerie let out a short, sharp breath. She grabbed her purse. She did not look at me again. She turned and walked out of the dining room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, a solitary, hollow sound that echoed the end of her reign. I watched her go. I felt the ache in my ribs, but for the first time in 20 years, I did not feel the weight of her shadow. I looked across the table at the empty chair she had left behind. The monster was gone, and I was still sitting at the head of the table. The silence that followed the reading of the new will did not last long. It was the breathless quiet of a vacuum before an explosion, the split second between the lightning strike and the thunder. Valerie stood there, her chest heaving, staring at the piece of paper Marcus Henderson held as if it were a death warrant. Then, she snapped. She slammed her palms down onto the oak table with a force that made the silverware jump. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the high-ceilinged room. "You have no right," she screamed, her voice shredding the decorum of the dinner completely. "You have absolutely no right to punish me for a moment of anger. I have served this family for 20 years. I have raised your son. I have kept this house standing." Grandpa Arthur did not flinch. He sat at the head of the table, his hands clasped over the handle of his cane, looking at her with a detached, clinical interest. "I am not punishing you, Valerie," he said calmly, "and this is not about a moment of anger. This is about a breach of contract." "Contract?" she spat. "We are family, not business partners." "The trust is a legal entity," Grandpa countered, his voice hard as flint. "And you just violated its primary protective clause when you laid hands on the beneficiary with the intent to coerce or harm regarding the assets. You triggered the disinheritance protocol. I did not sign your verdict. Valerie, you signed it yourself the moment you threw my granddaughter into that desk." Valerie's face turned a blotchy, violent red. She looked around the room, realizing that the legal argument was a stone wall she could not break. So she switched tactics. She turned to the emotional weapon she had wielded so effectively for 2 decades. She turned to my father. "Robert," she cried, grabbing his shoulder and shaking him. "Are you going to sit there and let them do this to us? To me? They are trying to strip us naked. They are trying to give everything to that ungrateful girl." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She is not part of this family. Robert, she has never been one of us. Look at what she is doing. She is manipulating your father to cut us out. Are you going to let her destroy our future, our family?" The room went deadly still. The words hung in the air. She is not part of this family. It was the subtext of my entire life, spoken aloud for the first time. For years, it had been implied in the seating arrangements, in the Christmas gifts, in the way she cropped me out of photos. But now, in her desperation, she had said the quiet part out loud. She was demanding my father choose between his family, her and Dylan, and me. My father looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and watery. He looked at Valerie, really looked at her, as if seeing a stranger wearing his wife's face. Then he looked at the screen where the video had just played, where the image of me cowering on the floor was burnt into his retina. "Robert," Valerie pressed, her voice pitching up into a shriek. "Speak to him. Tell him this is insane." My father took a deep, shuddering breath. He pulled his shoulder away from her grip. It was a small movement, but it felt monumental. "I cannot do that. Val," he said. His voice was quiet, cracking under the weight of shame. "What?" she breathed, stepping back as if he had slapped her. "Grandpa Arthur asked me a question last night," my father said, looking down at his hands. "He asked if I wanted to be a husband who keeps the peace, or a father who protects his child. I did not answer him then. I was too scared." He looked up at me across the table. His expression was one of profound sorrow. "I have watched you," he admitted, his voice gaining a little strength. "For years, I watched you make comments about Sabrina's clothes. I watched you forget to set a place for her at dinner. I watched you tell her she was too independent to need hugs. I saw it all, Valerie. And I told myself it was just your way. I told myself it was not abuse because you never hit her." He gestured weakly toward the blank projector screen. "But you did hit her. You hit her because you thought she had money that belonged to you. And in that video, I saw the way you looked at her. You did not look at her like she was a person. You looked at her like she was an obstacle." "I was upset," Valerie argued, but her voice was losing its footing. "You called her an outsider," my father said, shaking his head. "Just now, you said she is not our family. If she is not our family, Val, then what have we been doing for 20 years? I cannot defend this anymore. I have no face left to call this a healthy home." Valerie stared at him, her mouth open. Her primary ally, the man she had molded into a compliant shadow, had just cut the strings. She spun around, looking for a new lifeline. Her eyes landed on Dylan. "Dylan," she pleaded. "Baby, tell them. You know how hard I work. You know I did this for you, for your business, for your future." Dylan was sitting slumped in his chair, looking like someone who had just watched his house burn down. He looked at his mother, then at the screen, then at me. He was realizing that the golden boy pedestal he had stood on was built on a foundation of my neglect. "Mom," he said slowly, Did you really just attack her for the cash?" "It is $10 million. Dylan!" Valerie screamed, losing her composure entirely. "You do not understand. It is $10 million. Do you have any idea what we could do with that? Do you have any idea what kind of life that buys?" The silence that followed was absolute. She had said it. She had not denied the assault. She had justified it with the price tag. "It buys a lot," Dylan said quietly, his face pale. "But I do not think it buys the right to beat up my sister." Valerie froze. She realized too late what she had just confessed. She had admitted, in front of witnesses, in front of the lawyer, in front of the entire extended family, that the money was the sole motivation. She had stripped away her own mask of the sacrificing mother and revealed the mercenary underneath. Aunt Clara let out a sharp, disgusted breath. Cousin Mike shook his head, crossing his arms over his chest. The judgment in the room was a physical weight, crushing down on Valerie. She looked around, her eyes wide and frantic. She had lost the money. She had lost the house. She had lost her husband's support. She had lost her son's admiration. She was cornered. And a cornered animal attacks. Her gaze snapped back to me. I was the source of it all. I was the one sitting in the trustee's chair. I was the one holding the keys. "You witch," she hissed. "You think you can take everything from me?" She lunged. It was a desperate, flailing movement. She grabbed a steak knife from the table and threw herself toward me. "Valerie!" my father shouted, standing up. But I did not move. I did not flinch, because I knew something she did not. Before she could get within 3 feet of me, 2 large men in dark suits stepped out from the kitchen doorway. They had been waiting there the entire time, silent and unseen. They were private security contractors Grandpa had hired from Cheyenne. One of them caught Valerie by the arm, spinning her around with practiced ease. The knife clattered to the floor. The other blocked the space between her and the table, a human wall of muscle. "Whoa. Let go of me!" Valerie shrieked, thrashing against the guard's grip. "That is enough," Grandpa Arthur said. He did not stand up. He did not raise his voice. He simply exerted his authority. "Remove her from the property." "You cannot kick me out," Valerie screamed, her hair falling across her face, her dignity in tatters. "I live here. I am Mrs. Lowell." "You are a trespasser," Grandpa said coldly, "and you are a threat to the trustee. Under the new deed provisions, I am barring you from the ranch. Your bags are already packed. Valerie, I had the housekeeper put them on the front porch an hour ago." Valerie stopped struggling. She looked at Grandpa, stunned. You packed my bags?" "I knew you would not leave with Grace," Grandpa said, "so I prepared for your exit." He turned to Marcus. "The restraining order?" "Filed this morning," Marcus said, holding up a folder. "Effective immediately, 500 yards from Sabrina, the ranch, and Arthur. The sheriff has a copy." Valerie slumped. The fight went out of her legs. She looked at my father one last time. "Robert," she whispered, "you are letting them throw me out into the snow?" My father looked at me. He looked at the bruise peeking out from my sleeve. "You broke the family. Val," he said softly. "Not them. You." The guard began to escort her toward the door. She stumbled, looking back over her shoulder, her eyes wild with panic and loss. She had walked into this room thinking she was the queen coming to collect her due. She was leaving as an exile with nothing but her clothes. As the front door slammed shut, cutting off her wailing, the room let out a collective breath. Grandpa looked at the table. "I apologize for the scene, but it was necessary." He looked at me. "Sabrina, you are now the trustee. The financial decisions for the estate are yours. Do we proceed with the dinner?" I looked at the faces around the table. My father looked broken. Dylan looked shell-shocked. But they were still there. They had not walked out with her. They had chosen to stay in the room where the truth lived. "We proceed," I said. Aunt Clara stood up. She walked around the long table. She did not go to my father. She came to me. She placed a warm hand on my shoulder and gave it a squeeze. "You did good, kid," she whispered. Then Cousin Mike stood up and moved his chair. He dragged it from the far end of the table and placed it next to mine, effectively closing the gap where Valerie had been sitting. It was a silent, powerful statement. The family was closing ranks, not against me, but around me. My father looked at me across the table. He looked at the empty chair next to him. He took a sip of water, his hand shaking. "I am sorry," he mouthed. No sound came out, but I saw the words. I nodded. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement. The dinner ended in a somber quiet. One by one, the relatives said their goodbyes. They did not offer platitudes. They just shook my hand, looking me in the eye with a new respect. I was no longer the invisible girl. I was the woman who had stared down the tyrant and won. When the house was finally empty of guests, only the three of us remained: Grandpa, my father, and me. Dylan had gone to his room to process the fact that he was now broke and motherless in the practical sense. I walked out onto the front porch. The cold Wyoming air hit my face, sharp and cleansing. My ribs ached, but the pain felt distant now, like a memory of a battle already won. Grandpa Arthur came out and stood beside me. He wrapped his shawl tighter around his shoulders. A moment later, my father joined us. He stood on my other side, slightly apart, respectful of the space. Down at the main gate, half a mile away, we could see the red taillights of a car. It was Valerie's SUV. It was stopped at the county road, hesitating, before turning left and disappearing into the darkness. She was gone. For the first time in 17 years, the energy on the ranch was clear. The static was gone. The tension was gone. "She will try to sue," my father said, his voice rough. "She will try to fight the trust." "Let her," Grandpa said, looking at the stars. "She has no money for a lawyer, and we have the video. She has lost Robert. She just does not know how to stop fighting yet." My father turned to me. He looked at my profile in the moonlight. "I should have stopped it sooner," he said. "I should have seen it when you were 10. "Yes," I said, keeping my eyes on the horizon. "You should have." I did not offer him absolution. I did not tell him it was okay, because it wasn't okay. But he was standing here now. He was standing in the cold with me, watching her leave. And for tonight, that was a start. I reached into my pocket and touched the phone that held the video file, the weapon that had saved me. "Grandpa," I said softly. "Yes, child?" "You were right," I said. "The money did not change her. It just turned on the lights." "And now," Grandpa said, putting a hand on my shoulder, "we can finally see who is standing in the room." I looked at the two men beside me, one who had saved me, and one who had failed me, but was trying to learn how to stand. I was not standing alone outside the window anymore, watching a family on TV. I was standing on the porch of my own house, holding the keys to the kingdom. The wind blew across the plains, sweeping away the tire tracks of the black SUV, erasing Valerie from the earth as if she had never been there at all. The ink on the final signature page was still wet when I set the pen down on the heavy oak desk in Marcus Henderson's office. It had been 3 weeks since the disastrous dinner party, 3 weeks since Valerie had been escorted off the property by security, and 3 weeks since the silence in my life had shifted from a burden to a blessing. Grandpa Arthur sat beside me, looking tired but lighter, as if a heavy coat had been taken off his shoulders. My father sat on the other side of the room. He looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck, but lost all his luggage. He was alive, but he was stripped of the illusions he had clung to for 20 years. "It is done," Marcus said, closing the thick leather binder. "The trust is fully active. The deed to the ranch has been transferred. You are now the trustee of the Lowell estate. Sabrina." I looked at the documents. $10 million, the ranch, the control of my father's stipend. It was an empire of dirt and paper, but it was mine. "There is one more thing," I said, looking at Marcus. "I want to add a standing order to the annual distribution." My father looked up, a flicker of worry in his eyes. He probably thought I was going to cut his allowance further. "I want 5% of the annual interest diverted," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I want it sent to the Elena Lowell Memorial Scholarship we discussed, but I want the criteria for the applicants to be specific." "Specific how?" Marcus asked, his pen hovering over his notepad. "I do not want it to go to students with the highest grades or the captains of the football team," I said, glancing at my father. "I want it to go to the kids who sit in the back of the class, the ones whose parents forgot to sign their permission slips, the ones who stay at school late because they do not want to go home to an empty house or a house where they are made to feel like furniture. I want it for the invisible children." Grandpa Arthur let out a short, sharp breath that might have been a laugh or a sob. He nodded. "The Invisible Child Fund. I like it." My father looked down at his hands, his face flushing a deep, shameful red. He knew exactly who I was talking about. He knew I was using the money to save the girl I used to be, the girl he had failed to see across his own dinner table. Later that evening, back at the ranch, the temperature dropped well below freezing. I was standing by the fireplace in the main lodge, warming my hands. When my father walked in, he hesitated in the doorway. The dynamic had shifted so completely that he now felt like a guest in the house he had lived in for decades. "Sabrina," he said softly. "Dad," I acknowledged, not turning away from the fire. He walked over and stood next to me. I wanted to say, "I am sorry. I know I have said it before, but I need you to know. I let her run everything. I let her push you out because it was easier than fighting her. I thought if I just kept the peace, eventually you would all get along." "Peace at my expense is not peace, Dad," I said, turning to look at him. "It is just surrender." "I know," he whispered. "I see that now. She is suing me for alimony. You know, she is claiming I emotionally abused her by cutting off her access to the accounts." "Let her sue," I said. "Marcus will handle it." He looked at me, searching for the little girl who used to crave his approval. She was not there. In her place was a woman who held the purse strings to his survival. "Can you forgive me?" he asked. I looked at the flames dancing in the hearth. Forgiveness was a heavy word. It implied that everything was washed clean. "I cannot fix the last 20 years, Dad," I said honestly. "And I am not going to pretend that a few weeks of clarity erases a lifetime of neglect. From now on, the only apology I will accept is your behavior. You do not have to tell me you are sorry. You just have to show me you are a father." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I will, I promise." The next morning, I found Dylan in the barn. He was sweeping the center aisle, wearing a pair of coveralls that looked brand new and stiff. The Mercedes was gone, repossessed by the bank when the co-signed loan was called in. He was driving an old farm truck now. He stopped sweeping when he saw me. He looked embarrassed, his face smudged with dirt. "I missed a spot," I said, pointing to a pile of hay near the door. "I will get it," he muttered. He leaned on the broom. "Hey, Sabrina, look, about Mom." "We do not need to talk about her," I said. I did not know," he said, his voice cracking. "I mean, I knew she liked money, but I did not know she was like that. I did not know she would hurt you." "You did not know because you were standing in the light," I told him. "It is hard to see the shadows when the spotlight is always on you. Dylan." He looked down at his boots. "I do not want to be like her. I do not want to be the guy who needs his mommy to bully people for him." "Then do not be," I said. "You want to stay on the ranch? You want to work?" "Yes," he said. "I have nowhere else to go." "Fine," I said. "But you are not the manager. You are not the heir. You are an employee. You clock in at 6. You do what Cousin Mike tells you, and I will be auditing your hours personally. If you steal 5 minutes, you are out. If you ask for an advance, you are out. You earn your keep, or you leave." He straightened up, looking me in the eye. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of the brother he could have been if he hadn't been spoiled rotten. "Deal," he said. I left the ranch a few days later to return to Denver. I needed to get back to my company, back to the life I had built with my own hands. That night, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse. The city was spread out below me, a grid of golden lights shimmering in the cold air. It was beautiful. It was silent. I remembered the New Year's Eve when I was 14, sitting alone in the dark, watching the fireworks on a muted television while my family skied in Aspen. I remembered feeling like I was on the outside of the world, looking in through a glass wall. Now, I was standing on top of the world. The glass wall was gone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope, the trust document. I unfolded it, smoothing the crease where Valerie had grabbed it. I turned to the last page, where Grandpa Arthur had written a note in his shaky, cursive script. "Sabrina, if you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. It means they showed you who they really are. Do not let this money be a burden. If they hurt you because of it, use it to leave them. Use it to build a wall so high they can never climb over it again. And then, use it to help the ones who have no one to protect them. I folded the letter and put it back in my pocket. I picked up my phone and called my real estate agent. I want to buy another property, I said. Not in the city, near the ranch. A small house, 3 bedrooms, something with a big dining room. Investment? She asked. No, I said. A sanctuary. I bought the house on the hill overlooking the valley, 5 miles from the main ranch. I called it the neutral ground. It was my house, my rules. Valerie tried to fight. Of course, she hired a strip mall lawyer and filed a suit claiming the trust was invalid, claiming undue influence, claiming Grandpa was mentally incompetent. Marcus Henderson crushed it in 48 hours. He simply sent her lawyer a copy of the security footage from the study and a highlighted copy of the bad actor clause in the trust. He added a polite note that if she pursued the lawsuit, we would countersue for assault and battery and release the video to the local news. The lawsuit was dropped the next day. Valerie moved to Arizona to live with her sister. We never heard from her again. 2 months later, I hosted the first dinner at my new house. It was not a holiday, it was just a Tuesday. Grandpa Arthur sat at the head of the table, looking frail but happy. My father sat on his right. Dylan sat on his left, his hands calloused and rough from weeks of fixing fences. He looked tired, but he looked real. There was no shouting, there was no tension, there was no one making snide comments about my clothes or my job. I stood at the sideboard, carving the roast chicken. I poured the wine. I placed the plates in front of them. Thank you, Sabrina, my father said, looking at me with gratitude. Thanks, sis, Dylan said, digging in. I sat down at the opposite end of the table, facing Grandpa. He raised his glass to me, a silent toast. I realized then that I had done exactly what I told the taxi driver I would do that night outside the hospital. I had exposed the truth, but I had done more than that. I had dismantled the toxic structure of my family and rebuilt it, brick by brick, on my own terms. I was no longer the daughter who begged for a seat at the table. I owned the table. I decided who sat there, and for the first time in my life, the people sitting around it were there because they wanted to be, not because they wanted something from me. I excused myself after dinner and walked out onto the deck of my new house. The wind was blowing down from the peaks, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Below me, the lights of the small town twinkled in the darkness, the same town that had once felt like a prison. I took out my phone and opened the voice recorder app. I had started a channel to tell my story, to purge the poison, and the listener count had been growing by the thousands. People were hungry for justice. I hit record. This is Sabrina, I said, my voice clear and strong against the wind. And this is the end of the story, or maybe it is just the beginning of the real one. I looked down at the valley. If you are listening to this, and you have ever felt invisible in your own house, if you have ever been the child who was forgotten while the golden child got the glory, I want you to know something. You are not alone, and you have a choice. I paused, letting the silence of the mountains fill the recording. You can choose option A. You can stay in the dark, hoping they will eventually turn around and see you. You can wait for an apology that will never come. I gripped the railing of the deck. Or you can choose option B. You can build your own balcony. You can build your own table. You can work in the dark until you are bright enough to light your own way. And when you finally sit down to eat, you make sure that the only people invited are the ones who are hungry for your company, not your wallet. I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. The $10 million letter did not change who they were. It just turned on the lights bright enough for me to see the exit. And once I walked through it, I closed the door on the things that hurt me, and I opened the door to the life I deserved. I stopped the recording. I put the phone in my pocket and turned back to the warm glow of the house, where my family, the broken, healing, imperfect version of it, was waiting for me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I want to know about you. Where are you listening from right now? Are you listening from a place where you feel seen? Or are you building your own balcony? Tell me in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about justice served cold, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button to help us grow, and smash the hype button so this story can reach every invisible child who needs to hear that they can win. Until next time, keep your head up and your boundaries strong.